Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Maloney, CEO and co-founder of Tailwind, an AI-driven marketing suite that empowers 1 million plus entrepreneurs and small businesses to reach their marketing goals no matter their budget. Danny, I'm so excited to chat with you and not only get into the weeds of what you're working on in your founder journey, but also AI and how you're able to not only take on the technology, but use it in a way that is really, I think, impactful and a lot of, as they're looking and searching to whether it's create new content or get engaged or get out there, on how that's been able to really supercharge a lot of different aspects. And I'm curious on not only how it's done so for your business, but also how it's done so for your clients. But before we get started, what were you doing before you started Tailwind?
Yeah, good question. And thanks for having me, Julian. I'm really excited conversation today too. So before Tailwind, I have an entrepreneurial background. I actually started my first company when I was in college, and it was a good learning experience. Yeah, I quickly realized I had a lot to learn. But from there, I worked mostly at large tech companies. So I spent most of my career prior to founding Tailwind at Google and AOL and YouTube. Yeah. And it was kind of in a really fun set of roles where I got to work on projects before they were launched and well-known. Yeah, off the very early stages. So it was fueling my entrepreneurial juices in a number of ways, but more importantly, learning from some really bright folks.
Yeah. Well, and what were you doing as like your function of your job at that time?
Sure. So I started a team called the New Initiatives team back then. And you can think of it also as the executive pet project team. And so there were a number of ideas that were just off roadmap, but were interesting to explore, to think about how a business model could work and how we might actually make it function. So some of the ones that I touched on, Street View and Google Maps was one of the first projects I worked on. The YouTube creator program in the early days when we were trying to figure out how to drive a tighter connection between monetization and content, but also how to help breed a higher quality content ecosystem. Yeah. In the first place, at AOL, I was mostly focused on video. So we had a pretty aggressive plan there where we made some acquisitions and turned things around pretty quickly on the video front. But that was following AOL being spun out of Time Warner as an independent company again. And then Tim Armstrong was the CEO who jumped in and was really making a lot of stuff happen.
Yeah. What's the difference between running pretty much a startup initiative in a larger company versus running an actual startup and moving into a direction? Obviously, there's some inherent differences, but mechanically, are there any similarities, or what was that experience like going from that to something else?
Yeah, honestly, there are massive differences. And I think that was one of my rude awakenings going into like true startup founder life. In a large company, you don't even realize how many benefits you have in terms of just the advantages of getting a product to market, being able to work with other folks who are really strong at their craft, from having an HR and a recruiting department to having an established engineering team that can shuffle resources as needed, having access to massive user bases so that when you do roll something out, it becomes known by a lot of people instantly overnight. And then you go on the true founder journey. And in my case, it was myself and my co-founder, Alex. And you're sitting there and all of a sudden you're two guys in a coffee shop, right? And it's like, okay, how do we get this off the ground? How do we get anyone to know or care about what we're doing? It's a very different type of channel.
Yeah. And when you were obviously always curious in terms of founders and how they view the problems or not even problems or initiative that they're trying to, when you're working for those larger companies, was it just kind of testing that they were looking at, or were they doing analysis on user tracking or data and in ways that they need to kind of re-engage with a certain type of audience or profile? What was that process like at the larger companies?
Yeah, incredibly data driven, or at least that was my experience. So a lot of the ideas for new innovation comes from observing that a specific type of user is doing something unexpected, or you find that there might be an opportunity that, and then you go out and you get the data and try to size how big it is and whether or not it's worth going after. There were some cases. So like the history behind Street View in particular is that it actually came from one of the founders of Google who basically, like, I don't know if it's a true story, but the myth is, drove down the street, University Avenue in Palo Alto with a camcorder, recorded it and brought it back and said, I want this live video everywhere in the world, figure out how to make it happen. I don't know if that's 100% true or if that, changed in lore over time, but there were projects like that as well. And I think I was lucky to get to work with some very visionary product folks and the founders. And I think for me personally, that left a pretty deep impression of a balance between the two worlds, where data is important and you actually can provide real meaningful value through data. But sometimes you also need to have a fundamental insight into the world to see an opportunity others don't yet see. And that's what usually drives some of the real breakthrough points.
Yeah. How do you get past that? I guess almost like it's like a mental boundary. It's like a street view before that time, and kind of if the story remains true, it seems like almost a moonshot type of a project to have almost every street mapped out in the world, and being able to see almost in real time or close to real time these images and recognize what these locations are. How do you get past that mental block of this seems impossible to then break it down into the components to be able to build it?
Yeah, I think that it becomes a cultural question, and I think it does play out differently in different companies. Google was especially good at that, where one of the things I was taught actually during my orientation when I joined the company many years ago was to have a healthy disrespect for the impossible, right? So don't assume all things can be done easily, but you also don't assume that things can't be done. And if you take the Street View example, if that really was the ask, live video everywhere in the world, we're still not there over a decade later, right?
Right.
And at the time, there probably enough bandwidth on the internet to actually provide that service. However, you start breaking it down and you say, okay, maybe we can't get there, but what is feasible with today's technology? And there's actually a pretty strong parallel there with what we've been doing at Tailwind, because the marketing tech solution that we started out building is very different from our product today. And a lot of that shift has happened because complementary technologies have evolved over time, right? So I think the key is you get started in the right direction, and then you trust your ability to pivot as long as you move quickly along the way.
Yeah. That's a great point. And what was the inspiration behind Tailwind? You had been working with video and working with content and engaging with user data and figuring out ways to really either capitalize on data, like you said, users using things in an unorthodox or outside of the norm, and then obviously getting kind of ideas and conceptions and putting in reality. What was the inspiration behind starting a company like Tailwind and enabling all companies to kind of have exposure to benefit them long term?
Yeah, I think for us, there were really two big moments of inspiration. So one in the very beginning is very much the case of founders solving their own problem, right? So we were actually working on a consumer-facing website as opposed to a B2B service. And we saw that the world was growing at the time through visual media. So Instagram, Pinterest, Tumblr as well were all rapidly growing back then. But there were no tools really out there to enable anyone to take advantage of it. And so a lot of the early capabilities that we built were really for in-house use, where we said, okay, if we want the content from our site to go viral on these platforms, what do we have to do? And in pursuing that and talking to people about it, we quickly saw a lot of others around us, and especially friends and family and people in other industries, were basically saying like, oh, can we have that too? Right. And so the light bulb went off for us and said, oh, this emergence of the visual web back then was an opportunity that was underserved. And that was the insight that led us to phase one of Tailwind, which was building a visual marketing suite where we went really deep on platforms like Pinterest and Instagram and built a really robust toolkit to help people. The second major moment of insight came for us around 2018 to 2019. And in that time frame, what we saw was, okay, our customers were going really deep on these platforms, but it actually was causing some long-term challenge for their business because they were using all of their energy for growth on just one platform, which would eventually plateau. Right. And then it was impossible for them to make the leap to other platforms. So we took a step back and said, okay, if we were starting over and we had to build the right marketing tech platform for small businesses and solopreneurs and so forth, would we make it single network? No, we wouldn't. We would make it omni-channel. Well, what's the main challenge with that? Going to be the time that the person has to actually build the assets and promote their content everywhere. So how do we solve that? Well, it has to be AI and automation, right? And so we started investing in AI and automation back then in 2018, 2019, and especially content generation. And today we're a totally different product than we were 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Obviously I want to get into the AI and the technology and what it enables you to do, but just thinking about back to even currently now, because, a lot of companies still haven't made the shift, completely use those tools and resources. But what are the main barriers in terms of companies really tackling the omni-channel approach and going from platform to platform? Obviously, I know that it's the allocation of resources, but what else is it? Is it knowing what parts of those platforms that will actually be beneficial to your business? Is it testing of those different campaigns? What in particular kind of hinders a lot of companies jumping from platform to platform?
Yeah, if you start at the solopreneur level and think about early startup teams, right? The major challenges at that stage are, one, you usually don't even know what all the options are, right? Once you figure out what the options are, you don't necessarily have a deep knowledge of how to use each platform. And if you have to go and earn that knowledge, it usually takes years, not months, right? So that's like a long, slow process. And you usually don't have the funds or the revenue to hire up a really robust marketing team that's done it before, right? And so that's really the phase that we focused on with small businesses was, how do we get people at that point of feeling like they have a marketing team and getting the benefits of a marketing team, even if their budget doesn't allow them, right? Or even if their budget says, I can have one person doing marketing, but I really need a lot more capabilities around them. Those are really the high level challenges. I don't have enough hours in the day. I don't already have the knowledge, and I don't have anyone around me who has the knowledge. Yeah. And we just hear small business after small business struggle with that for years now.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about the knowledge, is it the content that they're generating? Is it the being able to kind of advise those platforms? Is it not knowing what their audience is going to be attracted to? Is it all the above? What in particular kind of hinders founders from, I guess, going through that learning curve more quickly than is seen?
Yeah, it's really from all directions, honestly. And of course it's going to be dependent on who the founder is and, who the initial team is. You might luck out and you've got an expert in SEO on your founding team, right? Most founders don't have that, right? Most founding teams don't even have a marketer in their midst, right? And so knowledge gap could be anything from, how do I even figure out who my audience is in the first place and who I'm serving? Right. It could be, in a world where there's 15 channels I could invest in, which one do I do? Then when I want to do it, you get into the content creation knowledge gaps of like, okay, am I creating a podcast? Am I creating visual content? Am I creating video? Am I going after TikTok? Am I going after Twitch? Am I going after, like, depending on what vertical, you could have a lot of choices and you don't have a lot of hours in the day, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of the challenge starts. And then you start to get a little bit deeper and it becomes more about optimization and honing your voice and getting into paid ads and how you allocate budget and so forth. But the early struggles are usually like, literally, where do I start and who am I even talking to in the first place?
Yeah. I don't know if you have a couple examples. It's just, I guess, an offshoot question, but are there certain companies that benefit from certain platforms, and is there kind of like a pattern with them?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are. So for example, if you look at our audience over time and you look at who went heavily down the path of, say, Instagram versus Pinterest versus email marketing, which is part of our solution now. Email marketing, you would see that certain types of companies like e-commerce brands, service providers, lean very heavily in that direction early on because they can get a really high ROI, right? When you think about Pinterest, there are certain consumer categories that were more prominent there. So thinking about things like lifestyle categories, weddings, travel, I mean, there's quite a few, but those types of categories. But usually on Pinterest, it was people who had ultimately information to market that would be helpful. Mm-hmm. And then on the Instagram side, you saw businesses that were a bit more brand focused, which could be things like consumer goods, it could be fashion. And so they're not necessarily marketing information as much, but they're marketing specific products and trying to inspire a lifestyle image, right? So within the platforms, we did see different types of businesses specialize in different directions. Mm-hmm. And then if you extend that, Twitter can be great for media, right? You've got Twitch for streaming and gaming and anything related to that. So there are some obvious choices, but the challenge that a lot of folks get into is like, maybe they can figure out what channel number one is, what's channel number two, right? And how do I continue growing? Yeah. It's become a lot harder.
Yeah. And when you started kind of thinking about and considering investing in AI, what was the process of actually getting involved with it? Was it hiring an engineering team or a couple of folks that were experts in building that type of technology? Was there a white label service out there? How did that implementation of AI? Because from the outside perspective, it seems like a very robust machine that takes a lot of expertise to start to build and conceptualize. What was your approach when bringing that technology into Tailwind?
Yeah, I think early on it was research and experimentation. So we had some specific features and some specific labs experiments that we did that began to just test out what was even possible and give us a sense of what the challenges were. I think if you fast forward to today, a lot of AI engines are becoming more accessible. And so it's making it easier for people to test and learn. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that if a company really wanted to do something in AI, you're talking about a minimum $500,000 project where you're hiring expert consultants, so forth. And now developers are learning how to leverage some of these tools in their spare time, right? So I think that's a major shift. In our case, we did make multiple acquisitions in the space that enabled us to jump the learning curve a lot faster and understand, even in a world where these tools are more accessible, what are some of the challenges you're going to face in really scaling and delivering a high quality service on top of it. And I think that's kind of the phase of learning that we're entering now, that is becoming more accessible. That's probably going to go on for 5 years, right? As people figure out how to do that well, because it is a new foundational technology. But we went with experimentation out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a second, a small piece about acquisition and kind of purchasing the resources to then build the technology out versus start from scratch. And I'm always curious to talk to founders who go into that kind of that approach or that strategy when bringing new technology or new teams like that. What was that process? How was vetting the particular? Was it were you vetting teams, companies who were adjacent to yours, and then bringing those teams on? What was not only the vetting process of those acquisitions, but also the onboarding of that and getting them in line with the team culture? What would you have done differently? And what have you learned kind of in that whole process and implementing those new resources into Tailwind?
Yeah, there's definitely a steep learning curve with M&A. I think in my case, I was lucky to have been able to see pieces of that in my time at Google and YouTube and AOL across multiple large deals. And so that gave me some exposure. At Tailwind now, we've made, I think, 7 or 8 acquisitions over the life of the company. So there's some practice there as well. Yeah, I think the vetting process, there are some standard steps that you go through in terms of you kind of have your pre-diligence where you're just learning about the company and trying to understand where there might be strategic fit. You figure out if you can negotiate a general term sheet that's going to work. Then you jump into really the real diligence, where now you're diving deeper, you're learning about as individuals, you're learning about the product, the technology, where it's at, what its weaknesses are, what the roadmap would have to look like going forward. And then you can start asking some of the deeper questions of, okay, will this really work the way I thought it was going to work? Right. I think when it's done well, that's a collaboration, right? So like the founder sitting on the other side of the table and their senior team, depending on size of team, they've got to be a big part of that conversation. It can't be one way. And I think from an integration perspective, what ends up working best then is by the time they're joining the company, it's already really clear where they're able to add a lot of value and they are like valued members of the team from day one, right?
Yeah.
Not all acquisitions are like that though, right? I mean, sometimes you're selling a company and you really just want to move on, or sometimes maybe you don't want to move on, but it's the right thing to do, or you're shutting down your product and you're taking some of the knowledge that was earned and maybe some of the tech and you're integrating it into a totally different product, right? Like that's very different than an acquisition where a company says, we want to just continue operating your product as a business unit, let's say, right? And grow it faster by giving additional resources. So it becomes pretty customized based on the specific situation.
Yeah. Discuss a little bit more about what AI has really done in terms of not only being able to, I guess, expedite or optimize the current customers you have, but kind of introduce them to more channels and what exactly is the technology enabling you to do now that you weren't able to do previously?
Yeah, I mean, it's really more about what it's enabling our customers to do, honestly. And it comes back to where those pain points are, right? The knowledge gaps and where that begins to slow down their process. A lot of it is around content creation. So enabling people to create content faster, clear writer's block or designer's block faster, get to a finished product. But interestingly, in most cases, get to a finished product that they feel is better than what they would have created on their own in 4 times the amount of time. right? So, we've got a product called Tailwind Create as an example that will help you design images and customize them for every network, right? What we heard is it was taking people 15 to 30 minutes per image to design in a tool like Canva. And then they start using Create and it's like less than 2 minutes. They have every image they need for every network, right? Yeah. So that's a major unlocker for our customers. And I think for us as a business, what it's really enabling is just delivering more value, right? So by changing that process, so by changing the struggle around marketing, we help our customers succeed. We bring them more value. That enables us to have a deeper relationship with them and to grow with them over time. Whereas in the past, we were kind of blocked at certain points from doing that by just like the natural constraints of the world, right?
Yeah. You tapped on something. I was talking to my company today about just the ability we use ChatGPT and for many different reasons as that's becoming a very popularized free service, but it was exactly what you said. It's clearing the writer's block. It's clearing all like the steps to get started and making that process much more quickly and more efficiently. And then in terms of the generation, it's really increased the ability to be able to put stuff out, start to testing really quickly, which I'm excited about what that's going to do for not only for our business, but also for other businesses out there and the type of content. I'm always curious, are we going to start seeing the same stuff out there or is this going to allow people to be more creative? Is it going to be uniformity or creativity? Which one of it?
Yeah, honestly, we don't see a lot of uniformity at all. It's really interesting when you go in and you actually look at reports of how are people really using these tools. So for example, we have a pretty widely used browser extension. So Chrome in particular. And we added our Ghostwriter AI copywriting capability into the browser extension not too long ago. And we've seen the usage of the extension just skyrocket ever since we did that. But the reason for it is now we've essentially made a tool like ChatGPT or the underlying GPT-3 model accessible anywhere on the web, wherever you are. So you're writing an email, you need help, it's right there. You're writing a Facebook post, you need help, it's right there. You're writing an Instagram post. But what's really cool is you see examples of use cases you never would have anticipated, right? So like today, one example that came up was someone who was writing a corporate policy, right? So think of one of those like really thick policy books that no one ever really wants to read, but it's really long and it takes forever. And they were just powering through page by page, paragraph by paragraph using our tool. And it was never a use case we had ever conceived or thought of. Yeah, they did it and we're extremely excited about it as well. So like, you see that like that. Or it's like people are still going to find completely unique ways to leverage this tech.
Yeah. It's amazing what you're able to kind of create with the AI model in regards to working through, say, a legal document or outside of content. There's so many different use cases, even research a lot of times and getting kind of a thing organized. I was using it the other day to conceptualize different podcasts and different questions. And it was really, it's almost like having a conversation without having to interact with someone else. As weird as that sounds, but it's still like an active brainstorming session, but you're able to do so without investing time or investing other people's time into that whole process, which is crazy to think about that idea. One thing that you brought to the show as a question, and I really love this question, is for some of the earlier founders out there, describe what kind of, I guess, markers or key things that you would see out there when you start to reach product market fit. And obviously there's a bunch of testing that goes involved and you start to find the features that are usable and successful. But when do you find, for early founders, when do you finally conceive it? Are there certain markers out there that hint or clue you in that you're in the right direction?
Yeah, I think, the cliche is that the market starts pulling the product from you instead of you having to push it.
Right.
But we've seen multiple instances of that over time. So thinking about the first iteration of Tailwind, where just, scheduling and publishing content was a really big part of it. We were running in private beta mode and literally started getting so many requests to enter the beta that there was no time in the day to actually add everyone. And we had to start building up a wait list and thinking about throttling our resources and things like that. So there's that kind of classic example. I think more recently, if I think about the implementation of some of the AI in the platform and specifically Ghostwriter more recently, it's one of those moments where we saw Ghostwriter overtake other features that had been in market for multiple years in terms of level of usage. And it happened within like 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something, right? Like it was super and it just keeps growing. Right. And then along with that, it's like all of a sudden we start seeing more social media mentions, and we have an affiliate program, and some of our affiliates who have gone quiet on us for 2 years and haven't marketed anything about Tailwind are suddenly asking us for information and wanting to do podcasts and wanting to write blog posts and so on and so forth. And so you get those moments where it's like the market sees something it likes and it says, oh, I want to have that. I got to know about that. I want to tell other people about that. I think those are really the signals. And the challenge is you grind through so much time to get there usually, right? Like it almost never happens overnight. Yeah. But I will say those are by far the most fun moments of the journey when you really hit on something and all of it. And it's like the energy just turns up to 1,000. Right. Yeah. So I think those are some of the moments for us when we started seeing those types of behaviors where it was like, all right, we know we're onto something and we got to lean more deeply into this thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And tell us a little bit about the traction of Tailwind. Obviously you work with, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, 1 million plus entrepreneurs and startups. And what's not only excited about the traction you've had so far, but what's essentially the direction you're excited to go in the next years to come?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, it is this direction of what does AI assisted or driven marketing really come to look like, right? And that's where we're really happening now, because we do believe ultimately what it's about, especially in the small business world, is helping small businesses really become omni-channel marketers, but doing that with high quality content and a well-represented brand, right? And I think we're still at like the tip of the iceberg to making that happen. So that's where our energy is going, is we want, not every product's going to succeed. Not every idea is going to succeed, because that's part of the entrepreneurial process. We want to know that every one of our customers got as much success as they could out of their product or idea or business. Right. And so I think that's going to be a ton of fun. Right. And so we're leveraging AI to help make that happen and to clear roadblocks, but it's like, it's the first inning of that 9-inning game. Right. So that's where we're
exactly.
We just want to make it easier and easier and higher quality over time.
Love that. What are some of the biggest challenges that Tailwind faces today?
Moving fast enough. Right. I think that's the biggest one.
Right.
I think because of that energy and because we've seen that tipping point, we're probably moving faster now than we have in the last 3 or 4 years ever. So that part is a lot of fun, right? Like it kind of is being at the first phase of company building all over again, whenever one of these windows opens up. The challenge is the market's going to evolve incredibly quickly, right? And so we have some advantages thinking about incumbents versus new startups in this space. As an incumbent, we have some advantages in terms of reach and brand recognition and installed base that we can leverage in getting this tech out to market faster. But we got to move as fast as humanly possible, because we have no idea how fast everyone else is, right? And so that's the number one challenge day in and day out, is just making sure we're only spending time on things that move the needle.
Yeah. If everything goes though, what's the long-term vision for Tailwind?
We want to help a whole lot of people be successful. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And that's why I started the company. Yeah. We want to help others succeed. I think there's just an immense amount of joy that comes from that. And it's a nice mark to leave on the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I always like to go into the founder FAQ. So I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions here and we'll see where we go. But what's the hardest part about your job today?
Wearing a lot of hats. So because of the mode we're in and how quickly we're trying to move, I'm a CEO. I'm also acting as a product manager. In some cases, I'm acting as a UX researcher or designer. In some cases, I'm acting as a therapist. There's a lot of hats to wear. I think managing the context switching through all that is really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some ways that you keep a company lean, but also kind of maximizing productivity? If you were to give it advice to another founder who, whether they're strapped for cash or not, or just want to conceptually keep a lean company, what are some ways that they can do that? Whether it's culture or I guess any advice that you would give to another founder?
Yeah. It's a mix of trusting others and truly empowering them to make decisions, and also having really good decision makers, right? One of the things that slowed us down during a rapid growth phase was we started having a lack of clarity in decision making. And then you start to see conflict in different directions and frustration. So you got to have really clear decision making authority and push that out as far as you possibly can throughout the entire company.
Yeah. If you were to have, say, a magic wand and have one wish that you could grant to give your company something, whether it's a boost in a certain area or department or resource, what would you wish for in terms of an injection of whether it's resources or some aspect of your business?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think it would be being able to quickly integrate some of our new tech into others' products. That would be incredibly cool and exciting. Would help bring a lot more reach very quickly, but there's probably a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like to ask this question really just to get an insight into the founder's mind. Whether it was early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
Ooh, that is a really good question. So mentors have been huge for me. So I worked for a guy named Davon at Google and YouTube and AOL. And he was a phenomenal mentor for me. Learned a ton from him. And he probably took me under his wing and gave me more responsibility than I should have had at that age. I also worked recently at a management consulting firm, BCG, and had some really great mentors there who taught me about professionalism. One lesson I think about that really stuck with me is the idea that power always flows to the calmest person in the room, right? So no matter what the situation or how hectic things seem, if you remain calm, you take everything in and you think about it rationally, people are going to come to see you as a leader. And that was a lesson that I really needed at that point in my life. So I'd say for me, it's more mentorship than books. Although if it were book side, the two I'd shout out, Good to Great, phenomenal, and a book called Necessary Endings, which has a really scary title, but is actually like life changing for me in terms of coming to terms with the fact that endings are part of life and that you need to learn how to navigate those endings in order to navigate life.
Yeah. Those are powerful lessons. I love the one you just said about being calm and really kind of analyzing a situation and kind of taking it. It's almost like you're taking in everything at once and then really kind of conceptualizing it and building something around it. And people kind of respect the thoughtfulness of it. I'm definitely doing that one for my company. I always like to give our founders a time to give us their plugs. But before we do that, is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have or that you would have liked to answer?
Oh gosh, I think this was a lot of fun. If I think about your audience being mostly founders, what else would I ask? I think maybe one thing to ask is how do you get through the hard times, right?
Yeah.
One thing I'll throw out there is every founder has them, right? Like we've grown to certain levels of success, but it's been a roller coaster the entire way for 11 years now. And there have been moments where I didn't know if we'd make it. And there have been moments where we've been on the biggest high possible. So first thing I'd throw out there is lean on other founders, build a community, make some friends who can commiserate with you because there really is no experience quite like it. And so the more you can have that community to lean on, the better.
I love that. And like I said, I always like to give our guests a chance to give us their plugs. Where can we be a fan of Tailwind, a supporter of you as a founder, but also start messing with the product and maybe even start engaging with it? Give us your websites, your LinkedIn's, your Twitters, everywhere that we can reach you and be a fan and supporter of.
Yeah. So, for us, I think the website, if you need a marketing solution, check us out. We're tailwindapp.com. So tailwindapp.com. Honestly, one of the easiest ways to check it out, though, is go and install the Chrome extension and start playing around with Ghostwriter. I think it's a great way to take a step into marketing where whatever marketing you're doing, help break that writer's block, get it done faster in your current workflow. And then you can come check out the rest of the product after that.
I love that. I'm downloading the extension after this. I love anything that can help me get past the writer's block, especially, or even just like writer insecurity is what I call it, because I think we overthink a lot of the content we try to build out. But Danny, it was such a pleasure chatting with you. Not only, absolutely, yeah. Maybe we'll create a channel to give some feedback. But it's been such a pleasure not only learning about your experience and what you've learned at the different companies you've been at, but also I think what's really cool is the pivot that you did with Tailwind and integrating a really, I guess, I think it's not even just popular technology. I think it's going to be an influential technology in the next 5 years. And it's always cool to see how that process was and what you've learned from it. So the valuable information and lessons that I think our audience is going to take from this. And I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show. And thank you again for bringing on the Behind Company Lines podcast.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, Julian. Thanks for having me. And I got to do this more often. It was a great time.
Yeah, have a good one. Absolutely.